A tear in the fabric of fate. The streets of Los Angeles moved like veins in a living creature, pulsing, relentless, indifferent. Life buzzed and hummed on every block, where sleek cars wove in and out of traffic, their horns like the city's heartbeat, and pedestrians hurried to chase deadlines, dreams, or simply survival. Among them, one man moved differently. There was no hurry in his steps, yet his presence was magnetic. Clad in his signature black suit, Keanu Reeves walked with quiet grace. His stride was purposeful, but not rushed. Polite nods met the eyes of those who recognized him, though he didn't stop for selfies or autographs. Not out of arrogance, but humility. He was on his way to a charity gala at a nearby hotel ballroom, something he had quietly agreed to attend weeks ago. It wasn't for show. It never was. Keanu had supported causes like this for decades, quietly donating, showing up, and giving back. Not because the world was watching, but because his heart told him to. The meeting earlier with the film production team had run long, and now the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the sidewalk. He'd have time for a quick touch-up before the event, just enough to fix his tie, glance at the talking points he'd agreed to share during the brief on-stage appearance, and maybe grab a water before stepping into the buzz of flashing cameras and small talk. But fate had other plans. He reached into his inner jacket pocket to pull out his phone and check the time. And that's when he heard it. Rurriab. The unmistakable, wince-inducing sound of fabric tearing. Keanu froze. A couple of steps more, and he came to a full stop. Slowly, he turned his arm and looked down. A long, jagged tear ran from his elbow to mid-forearm along the right sleeve of his tailored jacket. The fabric had given out completely, exposing the clean white shirt beneath it. It looked like it had snagged on something sharp without him noticing. He exhaled slowly, staring at the ruined sleeve. In 30 minutes, he was supposed to be on stage, wearing this. Cameras, donors, press. It was a formal charity event, and people would be watching. Not that he cared about appearances, but he also didn't want to disrespect the moment. It wasn't about him, after all. It was about the families the gala was supporting, families trying to rebuild their lives. Most celebrities in his position would have pulled out their phone and made a few calls. A stylist could be summoned in minutes, a new designer suit delivered by courier. There were entire teams for situations like this. But Keanu wasn't most celebrities. He turned, scanning his surroundings. Across the street stood a shiny luxury boutique, but that wasn't where his eyes landed. Just a few feet down the sidewalk, almost hidden between a high-end juice bar and a corporate bank branch, sat a narrow storefront. The sign above it was weathered, its paint faded and peeling slightly under the Los Angeles sun. Martin's Tailor and Sons, since 1962. Its display window showcased old mannequins wearing outdated jackets. A dusty sewing machine sat near the corner, and a handwritten sign hung crookedly inside the glass. Walk-ins welcome. Fast fixes with heart. Keanu took one more look at his torn sleeve and smiled quietly to himself. Something told him this was the place. He crossed the street. The little brass bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside. The shop smelled of fabric and thread. Warm, lived in, familiar. Not sterile or showroom perfect. Bolts of cloth in every color lined the walls, and on one side of the room sat a collection of thread spools, buttons, and aged sewing tools. An old ceiling fan creaked overhead, circulating the quiet hum of the city just beyond the glass door. At the back of the shop, hunched over a vintage sewing machine, sat a man. He looked to be in his late 60s or early 70s. His shirt was plain white, the sleeves rolled up, revealing weathered, calloused forearms. His thick glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he threaded a needle with surprising precision. His fingers moved with grace. Not speed, but the kind of careful attention that came from decades of practice. He didn't look up. Not at first. Keanu cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but respectful. The old tailor blinked and looked up, Behind his glasses, his eyes were sharp and perceptive, even if his body had slowed over time. He took in the sight of the tall man standing in his shop, the torn suit sleeve, the unmistakable face. Recognition flickered in his eyes for a moment, but he said nothing of it. Instead, he gave a small nod. "You've got a tear," the tailor said simply. Keanu smiled softly. "Yeah, thought maybe you could help." The man stood slowly, stretching his back. "Let me take a look." Keanu extended his arm. The tailor examined the tear, his fingertips brushing over the fabric with gentle authority. "Wool blend," he muttered. "Custom cut. Good thread. Bad luck. Seems that way." The tailor looked up. "You need it done now. I'm supposed to be on stage in about 30 minutes. Think there's time?" The man squinted thoughtfully. "I can try, but it won't be perfect." "I don't need perfect," Keanu said. "Just someone who cares." That made the tailor pause. He gave a slow nod, motioned toward a stool near the back, and gestured for Keanu to sit. Keanu carefully removed the jacket and handed it over. The tailor took it to his table, slipping on a pair of thin leather thimbles and inspecting the damage under a magnifying lamp. For a few minutes, the shop was filled only with the rhythmic hum of the sewing machine, the snip of scissors, and the whisper of thread sliding through fabric. Then, finally, the tailor spoke. "You don't talk much." Keanu chuckled. "I talk when there's something worth saying." The tailor glanced over his shoulder, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Smart man." Another moment passed. "I've seen your face before," the tailor added. "But I don't get starstruck. Not anymore." "I'm not looking to be noticed," Keanu replied. "Just patched up." That drew a real smile from the tailor. "You remind me of someone," he said after a moment. "My son used to be quiet like that. Always kind. Helped out around the shop before the world called him away." Keanu tilted his head gently. "Where'd he go?" "Army," the tailor said. "Iraq, 2008. Never came back." The air grew still. Keanu's expression softened. "I'm sorry," he said. The tailor didn't look up. "So am I." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was respectful. Then the tailor added, "He'd have liked you. You've got his heart, I think." Keanu said nothing, just offered a quiet nod. A few more minutes passed, and then, with a final snip of thread, the tailor held up the jacket. "It's not perfect," he said again, "but it's strong." Keanu took it, inspecting the sleeve. The stitching was discreet, almost invisible. The tear had been reinforced with skill and care. No flashy tricks, just honest craftsmanship. "It's more than I hoped for," Keanu said sincerely. The tailor waved it off. "Won't cost much." Keanu reached into his wallet. "I'd like to pay what it's worth." But the tailor raised his hand. "You already did," he said, his eyes steady. "You listened." Keanu looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't just a shop. This wasn't just a repair. This was a meeting that had been written in a thread much older than today. What Keanu didn't know, what no one in the city would know just yet, was that this simple visit to a forgotten tailor shop would set off a ripple effect that would soon reach far beyond Hollywood. The story was only just beginning. A stitch in time. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the skyline of Los Angeles as Keanu Reeves walked out of Martin's Tailor & Sons, the repaired suit jacket resting lightly on his shoulders. The evening breeze picked up, and he paused for a moment outside the shop, glancing back through the glass. Inside, the tailor had returned to his sewing machine, humming softly to himself, as if nothing unusual had just happened. But for Keanu, something had shifted. The world hadn't changed, but his world had. Just a little. In a city overflowing with stylists, brands, and glamorized perfection, he had walked into a dusty, humble shop and found something rare. Quiet craftsmanship, quiet grief, and quiet strength. The tailor hadn't fawned over him, hadn't asked for photos or autographs. He had just cared. Kindness. Not for clout. Not for show. But because it mattered. And in that brief encounter, Keanu had seen something else. Something deeper. Not just the skill in the man's hands, but the sadness behind his eyes. A wound that hadn't healed. A story untold. As Keanu turned and resumed his walk toward the gala venue, his mind wasn't on the red carpet, or the speech he was about to give, or the press waiting outside the hotel. His thoughts were still with that old man. The gala. The lobby of the Westfield Grand Hotel sparkled under massive chandeliers. The charity gala was already in full swing. Waiters carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. Soft music from a string quartet floated through the air, and people dressed in tuxedos and sequined gowns mingled, laughed, and clinked glasses filled with champagne. When Keanu entered, a wave of recognition swept through the room. Heads turned. Some whispered. Some smiled. Others immediately reached for their phones. A few tried to approach him, but he offered gentle nods and polite smiles before making his way to the quieter side of the ballroom. He didn't like the spotlight. Not in moments like these. The event wasn't about celebrities. It was about families. Families who had lost homes in fires. Families living paycheck to paycheck. Families starting over after illness or tragedy. He wasn't here to shine. He was here to serve. The MC, a cheerful woman with a kind smile, spotted him and signaled from the stage. His speech was next. Keanu nodded and approached. As he took the microphone, the room grew quiet. Cameras recorded. People leaned in. He cleared his throat, his repaired sleeve now a silent companion to his thoughts. "I wasn't planning to say much," he began, voice low but strong. "But sometimes life hands you little reminders on the way to big moments." He looked around the room, pausing. "I tore my suit on the way here." A light chuckle passed through the audience. "I know. Not exactly a disaster," he added with a small smile. "But in that moment, I had a choice. I could have called someone to bring me another suit, replaced it, moved on. But I didn't." He let that hang for a moment. "Instead, I walked into a tiny tailor shop, a place tucked between glass towers and neon signs. It didn't sparkle. It didn't advertise. But it had heart." The room quieted further. The man who fixed my suit didn't ask who I was. Didn't ask for anything. He just listened. He reminded me that sometimes it's not the big gestures that change lives. It's the small ones, the quiet ones, the ones that happen when no one's looking. He paused again, looked out at the crowd. "And that's why we're here tonight, right? To listen, to notice, to remind someone they're not invisible. A beat. So, let's be tailors, in our own way. Let's stitch people back together. Let's repair what others throw away. And let's never forget the power of quiet kindness." The room erupted into applause. But Keanu didn't wait to soak it in. He handed the mic back and walked quietly off stage, disappearing into the edge of the crowd. The following morning, the world woke up to headlines and clips from the night before. Keanu's speech at gala leaves audience in tears. From torn sleeve to heartfelt moment, Keanu reminds us of true kindness. Who is the tailor who repaired Keanu Reeves' suit? The internet wants to know. The last one caught his attention. Sitting in his modest apartment with a cup of tea, Keanu read the articles, not for vanity, but to make sure the story wasn't misused. He didn't name the tailor in his speech. That wasn't the point. But somehow, people had started asking. Martin's Tailor & Sons was trending on social media. People had begun visiting the shop, taking photos, leaving notes, writing reviews, not for celebrity gossip, but because something about that tiny detail in Keanu's speech had resonated with people. And behind the counter, unaware of the stir he had caused, Martin, yes, that was the tailor's name, kept doing what he'd always done. Sewing, mending, listening. Martin's story. That afternoon, the door opened once more, and Keanu stepped inside. Martin looked up, surprised but not shocked. "Did the stitch not hold?" he asked dryly. Keanu smiled. "Held just fine. I came to check on you." Martin raised a bushy brow. "That right?" Keanu nodded. "You're trending." Martin blinked behind his glasses. "I don't know what that means." "It means people noticed." The old man grunted, clearly unimpressed. "Didn't fix your jacket for a parade." "I know," Keanu said, pulling up a stool. "That's why it mattered." There was silence between them again. A peaceful, easy silence. Then Martin leaned back in his chair. "I didn't talk about my son much," he said quietly. Keanu didn't respond. He simply listened. "Eli was everything I wasn't. Brave, strong, quiet, but in the way that made you want to lean in. He used to sit right there, where you are now, watching me sew. Said one day he'd run the shop with me." He paused. "But then 9/11 happened, and everything changed." Keanu stayed still. He enlisted a week later, said the country needed stitching too. Martin laughed once, dry and brittle. Always had a way with words. His voice cracked, just slightly. He came back once, for Christmas, said he was thinking of opening a second location, somewhere in Colorado. We dreamed a little. A long pause. Next time he came home was in a box. Keanu lowered his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Martin." Martin's hands were on his lap now, fingers rubbing his palms as if trying to erase memories embedded in skin. "It's funny," he said. "I stitch other people's rips every day. But that one, right here," he tapped his chest. "That one I couldn't sew shut." Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence was the best thread of all. A surprise guest. 2 days later, a small package arrived at Martin's shop. Inside was a folded note and a wooden box. The note read, "For Eli. For you. For the thousands like you who stitched hearts back together without anyone noticing. From someone who saw it. Kr." Inside the box was a gold-stitched American flag patch. And under it, an envelope from the Veterans Support Alliance. A scholarship fund had been started, in Eli's name, seated anonymously, with a donation large enough to support 100 veterans and their families over the next year. Martin stared at the envelope for a long time. He didn't cry. Not exactly. But he did press the note to his heart. The ripple. Within weeks, the story of the tailor and the actor had spread. But not as gossip. As inspiration. People began sharing their own stories of being helped by someone who never asked for thanks. A single mother wrote about a bus driver who let her ride free for months. A teenager shared how a janitor had helped him through depression without anyone knowing. An elderly woman spoke of a grocery clerk who left food on her porch during the pandemic. And people started calling themselves tailors of kindness. #BeATailor began trending worldwide. Not because of fame, but because the world had remembered that small actions could heal big wounds. One last visit. A few weeks later, Keanu visited again. This time, he brought someone. A young man in his 20s, wide-eyed, nervous, clean-shaven, with the kind of look that said he'd seen hard days. "Martin," Keanu said, "this is Jalen. He just got out of a veteran rehab center. He wants to learn a trade." Martin looked at the young man, then at Keanu, then nodded once. "I've got a stool," he said. Keanu smiled. "I thought you might." And just like that, a new chapter began. A new stitch, a new thread. In a shop that had always been more than it seemed, threads that bind. The first morning light filtered through the city of Los Angeles like a soft veil, stretching golden fingers across sidewalks still damp with dew. The rush hadn't begun yet. Shops remained closed. Traffic was only a whisper. And in a small tailor shop wedged between towering symbols of modern life, something remarkable was happening. Martin's Tailor and Sons had never seen so many people at once. Outside, a modest line had formed. Curious strangers, veterans, students, and journalists. Some held their phones. Some held letters. Some held nothing at all, but an ache in their eyes. They weren't here for viral fame or celebrity gossip. They were drawn by something deeper, something quieter. Hope, healing, humanity. Inside, Martin adjusted his glasses and glanced around, slightly overwhelmed by the attention. The shelves behind him were freshly dusted, and the dusty window had been cleaned for the first time in years. Beside him stood Jalen, the young veteran Keanu had introduced only days ago. He wore a simple gray apron, and though his hands still trembled slightly when threading a needle, his eyes were clearer than they had been in months. "You okay?" Martin asked, his voice low but gentle. Jalen nodded, eyes on the jacket he was repairing. "It's like meditation," he said quietly. "Feels like breathing again." Martin didn't smile. He rarely did, but a warmth flickered across his face. "I used to say that to my son," he said. "Sewing's not just fixing fabric. It's fixing thoughts." The interview request. Later that day, a clean-cut man in his 30s stepped into the shop with a film crew behind him. Not flashy, just humble cameras, polite crew members, and a quiet approach. "Mr. Martin," the man began, "my name is Ellis Harper. I'm a producer with the Veterans Network News. We don't usually cover celebrity stories, but this one's different." Martin raised a brow. "We heard about Eli's fund, about the young man you're mentoring, and about the speech Mr. Reeves gave. We want to do a short piece, not a spotlight on Keanu, a spotlight on you." Martin shook his head. "I'm just a tailor." "That's exactly why it matters," Ellis said. Martin sighed, wiping his hands on a cloth. Then, after a moment of thought, he gestured toward the old wooden chair beside the sewing station. "You've got 10 minutes. On camera, off guard." The interview began simply. Martin answered questions in clipped sentences, never exaggerating, never straying into sentiment. He shared stories of his shop, of how it had opened in the 1960s with his father, and how his son Eli had taken to sewing almost as soon as he could walk. He used to mend his action figures' clothes when they tore, Martin said, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Told me even heroes needed stitches." The room fell silent after that line. Jalen, sitting quietly nearby, looked up with new admiration. The producer leaned forward. "And what do you think he'd say now about all of this?" Martin looked down, took a breath. "I think," he said slowly, "he'd say it was never about the thread, or the suits, or even the sewing." He looked into the camera, eyes misted but steady. "He'd say, 'Pop, you fix people, not clothes.'" The room held its breath. Keanu watches. Across town, Keanu Reeves sat in his trailer, taking a rare break between scenes of a small indie film he had quietly agreed to do. No press, no hype, just good storytelling. His assistant entered, holding an iPad. "You need to see this," she said softly. The screen played the interview, Martin's shop, his words, his face full of history and humility. And that one line, "Pop, you fix people, not clothes." It hit Keanu like a quiet thunderclap. He paused the video, setting the tablet down. He had done hundreds of films, given countless interviews, and played characters that had changed people's lives. But this story, the tailor, the tear, the chance meeting, this was the role that felt the most real. A visit from the past. 3 days later, a woman appeared at Martin's shop. She looked to be in her 50s, with soft brown eyes and a slow, careful gait. "Mr. Martin?" she asked. Martin looked up from his sewing. "My name's Mira Thomas. I served with your son." He froze. She stepped forward, tears already forming. "I never got to tell you. He saved my life." Martin stood slowly. "You knew Eli?" Mira nodded, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a folded American flag and a small photograph, one Martin had never seen. It was Eli, standing in a desert, arm around a fellow soldier, her. I was injured in an ambush. We were losing blood fast. Everyone scattered. But Eli stayed, carried me on his back 2 miles through enemy fire. She placed the photo on the counter. I survived because of him. I left the army, had a daughter, started a life. And every day since, I've wanted to tell you. Martin didn't speak. His hands trembled. I brought something else, she added. From her coat, she pulled out a box. Inside was Eli's dog tag. Burnished, weathered, sacred. I think this belongs here, she said softly. Martin reached out slowly, touching the cool metal with reverence. His breath caught. For the first time in years, he let the tears fall. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for coming. The community rises. What happened next was something no one expected. The interview had reached millions. Mira's story had gone viral. And suddenly, Martin's Tailor and Sons became something more than a shop. People started mailing in old clothes, not to get them fixed, but to be donated to people in need. Veterans sent letters, thanking Martin for sharing Eli's legacy. Young people from broken homes wrote emails, asking if they could learn to sew too. Local schools began inviting Martin to speak. A tech startup offered to build him a website, free of charge. A large fashion house even offered him a consulting job. He declined most of it, kindly. But one thing he said yes to, a tailoring mentorship program, hosted right in his shop, for veterans, troubled youth, and anyone searching for purpose through thread and fabric. He named it the Eli Stitch, a private moment. Keanu visited again, late one evening. The shop was closed, but Martin was still there, cleaning up, organizing spools, still mending the world. Keanu asked gently. Martin looked up and chuckled, trying. They sat together for a while, saying little. Then Keanu pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. I wrote something, he said. It's not much, but I think you should have it. Martin unfolded it. Read silently. It was a poem, handwritten, simple, but full of truth. The stitch unseen may hold the most. The thread that binds is never lost. In quiet hands, the world is sewn, and through the broken, love is shown. Martin blinked. You wrote this. Keanu nodded. Eli inspired it. You inspired it. The old tailor folded the paper carefully, pressing it flat. I'll keep this in the window, for every customer to see. A final reveal. Months later, at a quiet ribbon-cutting event for the Eli Stitch mentoring program, Keanu stood beside Martin, Jalen, Mira, and a handful of others who had become part of the growing legacy. No paparazzi, no flashing lights, just community. And then Jalen, standing nervously with a mic in hand, spoke. I was going to give up, he said. After I got back, nothing felt real. Nothing felt worth it. He turned to Martin. But then a man with calloused hands and a heavy heart taught me how to sew a button. Laughter, then silence. And in doing that, he stitched my soul back together. He paused, then smiled. I'm proud to be part of Eli's legacy, and I promise I'll carry the thread forward. The hidden seam. The city of Los Angeles had always moved fast, never waiting, never pausing, never listening. But now, tucked inside its restless heart, a modest tailor shop had become the unlikely center of something extraordinary. It wasn't about fashion. It wasn't about fame. It was about healing, hope, and the fragile beauty of things that are broken but not beyond repair. The Eli Stitch mentoring program, founded by Martin and inspired by Keanu's quiet visit, had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What began with a single needle and thread had become a tapestry of transformation. The shop, once quiet and aging, now hummed daily with the voices of young veterans, learning how to mend more than just fabric. And still, Martin worked. Still, he stitched. He never let the attention distract him. But those who knew him best, like Keanu and Jalen, noticed something changing behind his eyes. He was carrying more than his age. There was a fatigue that sleep couldn't erase, a whisper from the past. One rainy morning, the shop door opened with a chime that sounded softer than usual, almost hesitant. A woman entered, holding a soaked umbrella and a worn leather satchel. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the sewing stations, the folded jackets, the dusty photographs on the wall. Keanu happened to be there, sitting on a bench near the back, quietly observing Jalen practicing the zipper repair. The woman noticed Keanu, but didn't react like most people did. Instead, she approached Martin with a trembling voice. "Are you Martin Ellis?" she asked. He looked up. Yes. She slowly unzipped her bag and pulled out a small, time-worn notebook. "My name is Teresa Hall. I was your son's fiancée." The air inside the shop seemed to stop moving. Martin didn't move. He didn't blink. But Keanu stood slowly, instinctively stepping closer, his presence calm and steady like an anchor. Teresa continued, tears already forming. "We met when he was stationed in North Carolina. We kept it secret. We weren't sure how long he'd be deployed. He gave me this." She held out the notebook. "The week before he left." Martin's hands trembled slightly as he took the book. Inside were pages filled with Eli's handwriting. Letters never sent, plans never shared, sketches of suits, designs for a future shop, a name for their dream business. Ellis and Hall. Stitches with soul. Martin's fingers traced the ink. He couldn't speak. Teresa looked down. "I never reached out after he died. I didn't know how. But when I saw your interview on the news, I knew it was time." Keanu stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Martin's shoulder. Martin finally spoke, his voice rough and barely above a whisper. "He never told me. He wanted to," Teresa said. "He said you were proud of him, but he didn't want to disappoint you with his own dreams." Martin shook his head, overcome. "I wasn't disappointed," he murmured. "I was just afraid of losing him. And I did anyway." Teresa knelt down beside him, placing the notebook gently on the work table. "You didn't lose him," she said. "You carried him. In every stitch." The quiet aftershock. That night, the shop stayed closed. The lights remained off, the sewing machines silent. Martin sat alone in the back, the notebook in his hands. He read every word, every sketch, every fragment of the life his son had imagined but never lived. It was like hearing his voice again. And something inside Martin cracked, not from pain, but from release. For the first time in over a decade, the grief stopped being heavy. It started becoming light. Not gone, just changed. Keanu's reflection. Elsewhere in the city, Keanu sat at his kitchen table, staring at an old photograph he kept hidden in a drawer. It was of him and his own father, taken when he was just 10. He hadn't spoken publicly about his father in years. The man had left when Keanu was very young. No goodbye, no closure, just absence. But watching Martin's journey, his grief, his growth, his grace, had stirred something long buried in Keanu's soul. He picked up a pen and a clean sheet of paper. And for the first time in his life, he began writing a letter to the father he never really knew. The unexpected visitor. 1 week later, the shop received another visitor. She wasn't dressed in fine clothes. In fact, her jeans were torn, her coat threadbare. Her name was Rachel. She was 19 and homeless. She walked into the shop with her arms crossed, her eyes guarded. "I heard you help people," she said flatly. Martin looked up. "We try." She hesitated, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled shirt with a torn sleeve. "It was my mom's," she said. "The last thing I have of hers." Jalen stepped forward. "We can fix it." But Rachel didn't hand it over immediately. "I've been through 12 shelters," she said. "Nobody helped. Nobody listened. I don't trust easy." Martin didn't lecture. He didn't smile. He simply held out his hand. "Let us show you what thread can do." She stared at his hand for a long moment, then gave him the shirt. Rachel's redemption. Over the next few days, Rachel kept coming back. At first, she just watched. Then she asked questions. Then she threaded her first needle. Within 2 weeks, she had her own apron, her own corner, her own routine. And one evening, as the shop closed, she stayed behind and whispered to Keanu, who had taken to visiting almost daily now. "Do you ever wonder what it's like to have a real family?" she asked. Keanu turned to her, thoughtful. "I think family is anyone who reminds you you're not alone," he said softly. "Anyone who says, 'Stay, you belong here.'" Rachel looked at the glowing lamps, the shelves of fabric, the worn faces smiling around her, and she nodded. A gift for Martin. On Martin's 72nd birthday, the crew surprised him. The shop was decorated with hand-sewn banners. Every student had stitched a message onto a quilt. Veterans, teens, students, even the first customers who once walked in when the story first broke. At the center of the quilt was Eli's design, one of the drawings from the notebook. It was stitched in gold thread, and under it were the words, "Healed in hands, remembered in thread." Martin stood in front of it for a long time, eyes brimming, heart full. And then Jalen brought out the last surprise. A sign. Not a digital one. Not fancy. Just wooden. Hand-carved. Honest. Ellis and Hall. Stitches with soul. Martin turned, stunned. "It's time," Keanu said quietly, "to honor the dream he had, and the life you've given to others." Martin placed a trembling hand on the sign. He didn't cry, but everyone else did. The legacy expands. That month, something new was born. Martin officially renamed the shop. Ellis and Hall became a symbol, not just of one father's grief or one son's sacrifice, but of resilience, rebirth, and reconnection. Dozens of cities reached out, asking if they could open similar programs. Volunteers, donors, and veterans stepped forward. The first out-of-state branch opened in Colorado, just as Eli once dreamed. And Keanu, quietly behind the scenes, continued to support every step, not as a celebrity, but as a man who had once torn his suit and found a family instead. Echoes of the unseen. In the heart of Los Angeles, between glass towers and the restless buzz of a city that never paused, there now existed something rare. A space where silence was healing, not absence. A place where the weight of pain wasn't erased, but stitched carefully into something stronger. Ellis and Hall. Stitches with soul, once a fading tailor shop run by a grieving man, had evolved into a sanctuary for the forgotten, the broken, the searching. But even sanctuaries have their own cracks, hidden beneath layers of strength. And this time, the crack wasn't in a suit. It was in Keanu. A private wound. Keanu Reeves had always been known for his humility, his kindness, his almost monk-like peace. But even the gentlest men carry ghosts. His support for the shop had grown quiet but steady. He visited often, encouraged the mentoring program, and funded expansion efforts discreetly. Yet in recent weeks, he'd become distant. He still showed up, always with a warm nod or quiet laugh, but something had shifted behind his eyes. A quiet sorrow had returned, like a shadow that followed him closely, waiting for him to slow down. It was Martin who noticed it first. "You look like a man carrying a bag he won't open," the old tailor said one evening as Keanu sat watching Jalen teach a group of teens how to hem sleeves. Keanu offered a soft chuckle, the kind that avoided the truth. "I've carried worse," he replied. Martin leaned forward, resting his weathered hands on the table. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Keanu didn't smile in return. Instead, he whispered, "I think it's time I talk about it." The letter. A week later, the entire team at Ellis and Hall gathered in the shop after hours. No cameras, no press, just family. the kind that had been stitched together by shared stories and scars. Keanu stood at the front, holding a piece of paper in his hand. "This isn't a performance," he said. "I wrote something. Something I've never shared. And I'd like to read it. Not because it's perfect, but because it's true." Silence fell. He began. "Dear Dad, I don't know if this letter will find you. I don't even know if you're alive. You left before I understood why fathers mattered. You left before I knew who I was. For years, I told myself it didn't hurt, that I didn't need you, that I became who I am without your help. But the truth is, I needed you the most in the quiet moments. When I came home to an empty apartment after my first big film. When I lost someone I loved and didn't know how to grieve. When the world clapped and I still felt hollow. I used to think I was broken because of you. But then I met a man named Martin, a tailor, a father, a man who lost his son but never lost his love. And he reminded me, we're not broken because we've been hurt. We're broken when we stop loving in spite of it. So, Dad, if you ever read this, I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because I need to let go. And I hope, wherever you are, you found your thread too. Keanu." He folded the letter, his hands shaking slightly. No one spoke, not even Martin. It wasn't a moment for applause. It was a moment for honoring the silence. The stranger at the door. 2 weeks later, a man appeared at the door of the shop. He was thin, in his late 60s, wearing a coat 2 sizes too big and a face that looked like it had weathered storms few people survived. He looked around, hesitant. I heard this place helps people," he said. Rachel was the first to greet him. "We do. What kind of help do you need?" He pulled out a jacket from a brown paper bag. It was fraying at the cuffs, the zipper broken. But there was something oddly familiar about the way he held it, like it carried more than cloth. "My name's Sam," he said. I used to be someone else." He didn't elaborate. Jalen offered to take the jacket. Martin, watching from the corner, narrowed his eyes. Later that night, as the others left, Martin pulled Keanu aside. "That man," he said, "he has your eyes." Keanu frowned. "What do you mean?" "I think," Martin paused, "I think he's your father." The confrontation. Keanu returned the next day. Sam was there again, sitting on the bench, watching quietly as Rachel taught a new boy how to stitch. Keanu walked over and sat beside him. "You came back," he said. "I never really left," Sam replied, his voice rough. "I just stopped showing up where it mattered." There was silence. Then Sam added, "You wrote me a letter." Keanu froze. "It found me," Sam said. "Or maybe I was just meant to find it." Keanu stared at him, studying every line in his face, searching for truth. "Why did you leave?" he asked softly. Sam swallowed. "Because I didn't think I was enough. I was a drunk. A mess. I thought leaving was protecting you." "You were wrong," Keanu said, no anger in his tone. "Just ache." "I know," Sam whispered. "I've lived with that every day." Another silence. Then Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out a needle and thread. "Then show me something," he said. "Sit. Learn. Stitch. Start." Sam blinked. "You want me to sew. I want you to stay. Stitching time." Over the next month, Sam came to the shop every day. He was clumsy at first, slow, frustrated. But Martin took him under his wing with the same grace he'd shown Jalen and Rachel. Keanu watched from afar, never pushing, never rushing. Sometimes healing wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was slow, like the way thread works its way through torn fabric, little by little. And then, one afternoon, Sam completed his first jacket repair. He held it up, proud but uncertain. Keanu smiled. "That's the first thing you've ever made for me," he said. Sam looked down, a tear slipping free. "I wish it hadn't taken me so long." "But it did," Keanu said. "And you're here now." The gala. 1 year later. Exactly 1 year after the original gala, the night of the torn suit, the Ellis and Hall Foundation held its first anniversary benefit. It was held not in a grand hotel, but right inside the tailor shop. Chairs were set in rows. Lanterns hung from the ceiling. Quilts lined the walls, each one stitched by someone who had once walked in broken and left mending. Martin gave a speech. Jalen shared his story. Rachel introduced 3 new teen apprentices. And finally, Keanu stepped up. He wore the same black suit, the one Martin had mended a year ago. He held up the sleeve. "This tear," he said, "changed everything." He paused. "I used to think that things were only valuable if they were untouched, untorn, unscarred. But I was wrong. This," he pointed to the repair, "this is where the real story is, not in the perfection, but in the fixing." He looked out at the crowd. "Thank you for letting me be part of the stitching. The golden thread. It began with a tear in a sleeve, but now it had become something else entirely. A movement, not of noise and spectacle, but of soft-spoken purpose. What Ellis and Hall had built wasn't just a shop or a mentorship program. It had become a living story, told not through headlines, but through stitches. Every person who walked in carrying something broken, be it a jacket or a heart, walked out with something restored. Keanu Reeves, once just a passerby with a torn suit, had become something like a silent architect behind the scenes. He never asked to be named. He didn't want his face on billboards. He just wanted the world to remember what it meant to care. But now, the world had started listening. A letter from abroad. One quiet Monday morning, as Martin brewed his usual black coffee and dusted the corners of the sewing counter, Jalen handed him a package. The return address read, Kandahar, Afghanistan. Martin froze. He opened it carefully. Inside was a hand-stitched scarf, frayed but clearly sewn with care, and a letter written in uneven English. "Dear Ellis and Hall, I am Sergeant Nadim Khan. I am not from your country. I served with American troops. One of your veterans, Michael H., told me about your shop when he visited my village for relief work. I taught sewing to orphaned girls here. It gave them dignity, hope, and when I learned about Eli and your program, I cried, because Eli's dream did not die. I sent this scarf. It is made by one of the girls. She says to tell you, when you sew, you bring light to forgotten places. Thank you, America. Thank you, Ellis and Hall. Thank you, Keanu. Yours in thread, Sergeant Khan." Martin stared at the letter for a long time, his eyes wet. He turned the scarf over. Sewn into the edge was a single golden thread. Rachel, who had just walked in, tilted her head. "Why the gold?" Martin smiled softly. "It's a tradition in Persian embroidery," he explained. "A gold thread symbolizes light through darkness, a promise." He placed the scarf gently on a new shelf behind the counter. The team decided to name that section of the shop the Golden Thread Wall, a growing display of items stitched by those touched by Ellis and Hall, near and far. An invitation from the White House. By the time autumn painted the streets in hues of orange and gold, Ellis and Hall had opened 3 more branches, one in Denver, one in Cleveland, and one in Atlanta, each operated by veterans trained in the original leather shop. Then came a knock on the door that none of them saw coming. An envelope, marked with an official seal. Inside, a personal invitation for Martin, Jalen, Rachel, and Keanu to attend the National Service and Humanity Awards in Washington, D.C. Ellis and Hall had been selected as recipients of the Human Spirit Award, the highest civilian recognition given for grassroots humanitarian work. The honor was immense. But Martin hesitated. "I'm just a tailor," he murmured. Keanu placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're more than that, Martin. You're a weaver of lives." Preparing to leave, the shop buzzed with a mix of nerves and excitement. Rachel, never one for dresses or fancy events, reluctantly agreed to wear a suit she tailored herself. Jalen ironed his white shirt 3 times before finally deciding it still looked too stiff. Martin sat at his workbench, polishing the very same glasses he'd worn the first day Keanu had walked in with that torn sleeve. And Keanu. He stayed quiet, watching, absorbing. On the evening before the flight to D.C., he gathered the 3 of them for dinner at his quiet home in the hills. No red carpet, no cameras, just a home-cooked meal, soft jazz in the background, and a view of the city lights below. As they sat on the patio, Keanu raised his glass. To the stitch that started it all. They clinked glasses, and Martin added, and to the man who could have replaced his jacket, but chose to repair it instead. The speech that broke the room. The award ceremony was held in a grand marble hall, filled with dignitaries, community leaders, veterans, and celebrities. The First Lady herself introduced Ellis and Hall. Martin stood at the podium first, trembling slightly, his old hands gripping the microphone. "I was never meant to be seen," he began. "I was just a man with a needle and a broken heart." He looked out at the audience. But sometimes pain becomes the thread that ties people together. He paused. "My son died in Iraq, and I died a little with him. I spent years pretending I was still living, but I was just surviving. Then a man walked into my shop. Quiet, kind, torn." He turned to Keanu, who sat in the front row, eyes lowered. That tear in his sleeve was the start of something none of us expected. Then Jalen came up, then Rachel. Each shared their own fragment of the story. And finally, Keanu stood. He didn't prepare a speech. He simply said, "Kindness is invisible until you need it." The room fell silent, and then rose to its feet in standing ovation. The ripple becomes a wave. Within days of the ceremony, Ellis and Hall received thousands of emails from around the world. Offers to partner, requests to train, notes of thanks from people who had never stitched a thing but felt somehow sewn back together just by hearing the story. From a fisherman in Maine, to a former addict in Berlin, to a teacher in Mumbai, they all said the same thing: "I want to be a tailor of kindness." The phrase caught fire. #Tailors of Kindness became a global campaign, but it wasn't just words. It was action. In cities across the globe, people started Ellis Hars, volunteering 1 hour a week to mend not clothes, but lives. From soup kitchens to school tutoring to elderly care, the spirit spread. The golden thread stretched farther than anyone imagined. A quiet return. After the whirlwind of the award, the press, and the flood of attention, Martin returned to Le and reopened the shop like it was just another Monday. Same dusty floors, same familiar smells, same hum of thread. Keanu visited that afternoon. "Feels like the beginning again," he said. Martin nodded. "Beginnings hide in endings. That's the trick." They sipped coffee in silence, watching the new batch of apprentices practice their first stitches. Then Martin turned to Keanu. "There's one more stitch you haven't finished," he said gently. Keanu frowned. "What do you mean?" Martin handed him a small parcel wrapped in linen. Keanu unwrapped it slowly, revealing the same jacket with the original tear. It had been raison, this time with one gold thread running through the seam, subtle but deliberate. "Every scar," Martin said, "deserves to be honored." Keanu held the jacket to his chest, overcome. It was never about hiding the tear. It was always about marking it with meaning. The seam that never breaks. There are stories that end, and then there are stories that become something, woven not with ink, but with memory, soul, and moments so real they change the rhythm of hearts around them. The story of Ellis and Hall had been born from a tear, a simple rip in a jacket. But what followed had transcended even the wildest dreams of the man who walked in quietly needing a repair, and the tailor who thought he had nothing left to give. This was not the end. This was the legacy. A winter unlike any other. Los Angeles winters are more suggestion than season. Cool air in the morning, Sunshine by noon, a brief whisper of wind as the sun sinks behind the hills. But that winter felt different at Ellis and Hall. For the first time since its reopening, the shop stayed open 7 days a week, not because of profit, but because the need had grown. Jalen was now overseeing mentorship programs in 3 states. Rachel had become a leader for the youth program, designing beginner kits for shelters and schools. Martin, now 73, still came in every morning at dawn, even though he was told he didn't need to anymore. And Keanu. He was still there, still listening, still showing up like a ghost of kindness, offering his presence more than his fame. The world had changed, because this story had changed it. But quietly, beneath the momentum and goodwill, something was shifting again. A doctor's visit. One morning, before sunrise, Martin stood longer than usual at the window of his shop. His hands trembled slightly, and not from cold. The stiffness had grown worse over the last few months. His memory sometimes faltered. He'd lose names, forget thread types, or pause mid-stitch without realizing it. He'd kept it private. Until now. The diagnosis was early-onset Parkinson's. He told no one. Not at first. He didn't want pity. He didn't want the story to become about his fading body. But when he dropped a pair of scissors one morning and couldn't bend down to retrieve them, Keanu saw it happen. "Martin," he said gently, kneeling to pick them up. "Is it time we talked?" Martin said nothing. He just looked at his hands, those same hands that had brought life back into fabric, into people, for decades. Now, those hands betrayed him. The family meeting. That evening, Keanu called a quiet gathering at the shop. Jalen, Rachel, Mira, Ila's former fiancé, Sam, Keanu's estranged father, now part of the program, and a few of the senior apprentices gathered around the center worktable. Martin stood in front of them, wearing a clean white shirt and the jacket Eli had once designed in his notebook, a custom piece stitched together by Rachel and Jalen in secret. "I don't have many speeches left in me," Martin said, voice thick with emotion. "But if I have one more stitch to give, it's this. Don't stop." He looked around the room. "This place doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to you, and to everyone who walks in needing to feel whole again." Rachel reached out, gripping his hand. "You built this. We'll carry it." Martin nodded slowly. "And when my hands stop working," he said, "I'll still be here. Watching. Teaching. Holding the thread in my own way." A letter from the Pentagon. A month later, a letter arrived. The official seal of the United States Department of Defense marked the envelope. Inside was a notice that the department had formally recognized the Eli Stitch program as a nationally recommended therapeutic service for returning veterans. With it came a grant to expand the program across every major U.S. military base. And attached was a photo. A group of newly discharged soldiers, men and women who had seen war, loss, and suffering, smiling as they held up needlework, patches, flags, garments, small stitched tokens of peace. At the center of the group stood a young woman named Corporal Maria Chen, holding up a sign that read, "When bullets broke us, the thread brought us back." Martin wept when he saw it. Keanu framed it in gold and placed it next to Eli's dog tag on the wall. The final gift. As spring approached, the team surprised Martin with something he'd never expected. They had been working on it for months in secret. Every mentor, apprentice, and alumni had contributed. Pieces came from 26 cities across 9 countries. It was a massive quilt, over 12 feet wide, stitched with stories. Each square represented a life touched. In the center, in silver thread, were the words, "For the tailor who mended more than cloth. For the father we all found." Martin's voice broke completely when he saw it. He walked to the quilt, placed both hands on it, and said only 4 words. "This is my piece." Keanu's final stitch. Some weeks later, Keanu returned one evening to the shop alone. He wore a hoodie, jeans, and a beanie. The lights were off, the door locked, but he had a key. He walked to Martin's old chair, now more a shrine than a seat, and sat down in silence. Then, from his coat, he pulled a small bundle of black fabric. It was the original suit jacket, the one that tore, the one Martin had repaired. He unfolded it slowly, and from his pocket pulled out a gold thread and a needle. There, on the inside lining, he stitched something by hand. Clumsy, uneven, but from the heart. "You made me whole." He folded the jacket, placed it gently back in the box, and left it under Martin's chair. A full circle. 3 months later, Keanu was invited to speak at the World Kindness Forum in Switzerland. He declined, at first, but Martin sent him a text that simply read, "The world needs to know it's okay to care." So he went, and on the grandest stage of his life, not as a movie star, but as a man, he delivered his final message. We are all torn, in ways the world cannot see. Some of us walk around wearing holes in our hearts. Others pretend there's no damage. But the truth is, we're all waiting for a needle, for someone who says, "Sit, let me fix what I can." Be that person. Even if it's messy, even if it's slow, stitch with patience, mend with love, and never, never underestimate the power of a quiet repair. The final scene. Back in Los Angeles, the Tailor shop had become more than a building. It had become a symbol. Visitors came not just to learn sewing, but to learn listening. A new plaque hung over the door. It didn't read Ellis and Hall anymore. It now read, "The seam that never breaks. In memory of Eli. In honor of Martin. In gratitude to those who chose to repair instead of replace." Inside, a new generation was already learning to stitch. Rachel oversaw operations. Jalen had launched Ellis and Hall Global. Sam ran the front desk with a quiet pride. And Martin, he no longer stitched, but he still taught. His hands might have slowed, but his soul, it had never been steadier. One more visitor. Late one evening, long after closing, a young man knocked on the shop door. He was nervous, lost, holding a ripped hoodie. Rachel opened the door and smiled softly. "Come in," she said. "You're in the right place." And just like that, it began again.